I just joined the other session, and I think the discussions are already on fire. I hope this session also will continue the same flow, and I'm happy to share to share this session along with different speakers. We will have different interventions, including from Michael Moreno. I think also Michael is connected to take us through the consultations processes, especially from Canada and other democracies from across the globe. I will also be hosting Munira Yassien, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I don't see her yet on the list from my end, but hopefully if she didn't join, she will join us soon. And we will also have Jaijun Lee. And correct me if I'm saying the name wrong, but yeah, it will take us through the socio-technical spiral when participation of privacy-enhancing technologies for privacy-preserving AI. I'll be also presenting with my colleague Rouguiyatou from Niyel to mainly talk about participatory AI governance through capacity building and capacity building and AI governance initiatives that Niyel is leading on, especially focusing on the West Africa region. Allow me to start with Michael. Michael, are you here?
Yes. How are you? Hello, everybody.
Hi, Michael. So I'm very excited about to hear from you actually about the consultative processes in Canada, but also around how meaningful engagement looks like from Canada and other democracies. And especially, I went through your paper, and I hope everyone is also in the room had the chance to read your paper and to reflect on the public consultations processes and how, I mean, Canada is considered one of the global leaders on participatory governance. However, it's also maybe struggling or facing a lot of challenges related to equal participation. Same also in the African continent. So I'll be happy to hear, like all of us, to hear from you about the consultative processes. What's wrong with the consultative processes, either in Canada or other parts of the continent, but also how to ensure effective consultative processes. And over to you, Michael.
Yep. Should I share my screen now as well?
And also, if you, I don't know if you had the chance, but we can introduce, you can introduce yourself while before starting as well, so that everyone knows who's in the room. Thanks. Over to you,
Okay.
Michael.
Good. Yeah. So first, quickly, I think it's important to give a quick framing on today of, what is this critical challenge facing democracies worldwide? How do we meaningfully engage citizens in shaping AI governance? We'll be sharing lessons from Canada and comparing them to what we observed in other countries, as you mentioned, Australia, Colombia, and the United States. The objective, obviously, is not to criticize any of these governments, but to identify the challenges democracies are facing when seeking input on AI. And these problems are affecting every democracy we study. So first, quickly define what we mean by meaningful engagement. This concept comes from research by scholars and organizations like the OECD and is mentioned by the Canadian government in their consultation process. So there's three steps to it. The public is aware of the opportunities to participate in the consultation. So this can come in the marketing. Where are they publishing these consultations? The second, the public have the information they need to contribute. So this can come from the actual consultation documents themselves. And then lastly, the public believe their input will be used to shape government decisions. And if citizens feel like the outcome is already determined or the consultation is just for show, they likely won't participate, and in turn, they can lose trust in the process as well. So quickly, I want to walk through our methods. And like I mentioned, this study is actually the third in a series. We previously examined consultation process in Colombia, Australia, as well as the US using the same methodology. It really allows us to make a meaningful comparison across these countries. So the five main questions that we asked were, how and when did governments engage with their citizens? We looked at what the timeline was, what platforms were used, what were the methods of outreach. Second, what materials did the government provide to prepare the public to give informed advice? Were the materials accessible to everyday citizens, or did they require specialized knowledge? Third, did the policymakers attempt to ensure a broad cross-section of people knew about and could comment on the proposed policy? In other words, they go beyond their usual stakeholder list. Um, Fourth, who actually participated? We created a detailed breakdown on the respondents by sector and type. And then lastly, did the government provide evidence it made the use of its feedback it received? As I mentioned before, without demonstrating responsiveness, the entire process can, lose trust of the citizens and the less people participate. So then additionally, I want to point out we use the IAP2 spectrum for public participation. We use this to help characterize the levels of participation with the 5 levels going from informed to empower, kind of the lowest level to the highest level. And we really use this as a descriptive tool to help categorize each country's engagement, which we'll get into a bit more later on. So, yeah, for this paper, we examined 2 Canadian consultations. They were the only ones where the responses were fully published from 2023 to 2025, and by the time of our research. First, got into the copyright in the age of generative AI consultation. This was led by the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Agency and the Department of Canadian Heritage, running from October 23 to January 24. There were 103 published submissions, as well as the government mentioned they received around 1,000 individual questionnaire responses. However, those were unpublished, and there was no information about who gave those comments and what those comments entailed. So, for the sake of this study, we were not able to review those. Then we looked at the artificial intelligence competition consultation led by the Competition Bureau. That ran from March 24 to July 24 and published 25 submissions out of the 28 received. And you already noticed that Canada has, 38, 39 million, and these are very low numbers, especially when you take into account how many citizens are worried about AI and the future for AI. So quickly, I want to jump into the findings that we had for the copyright in the age of generative AI. As I mentioned, received 103 published submissions, with business and trade associations dominating that with about 46%. For the materials, the government provided consultation documents and other relevant resources that were provided. They were very technical. They were addressing, text and data mining, liability frameworks, licensing issues. So these would often require previous expertise or knowledge on these situations. Outreach relied primarily on government websites, targeted emails, and social media, whose posts got minimal engagement. A few likes, a few reposts. So it doesn't seem like it really reached the broad representation that they were looking for. And lastly, the government held 7 invitation-only roundtables and published a What We Heard report. But that What We Heard report served more as a summary and didn't explicitly show how that feedback may have shaped policy decisions. So then getting into the artificial intelligence and competition consultation, as I mentioned, they received 28 submissions, 25 published, and firms and business associations both dominated that with 28%. The discussion paper, again, focused on technical aspects of competition policy, and similar to copyright, it relied heavily on government websites and social media, again, attracting some low engagement. Again, similarly, the What We Heard report acknowledged the input, but provided no concrete examples of how the feedback influenced the Bureau's approach. And relative to their population, just 25 submissions suggest that these consultations really only reached a fraction of the potentially affected citizens or companies that would have been able to comment on this. So I think it's a little helpful to put this in the framework, as I mentioned, the IAP2, and you'll notice across all the 4 democracies we studied, all of them leaders in open governance, consultation process informed stakeholders. They collected feedback, but they really failed to meaningfully involve, collaborate, and empower these citizens. So as you can see, they all stopped at that second level of consult, really not moving towards meaningful engagement. So yeah, now we're looking at that meaningful engagement. This table really shows that no country was able to achieve that. All four of them relied on traditional channels, whether that was the government websites, like I mentioned, formal submission, and expert dialogues. None of the materials seemed accessible for non-experts. All assumed prior knowledge. As I mentioned, being asked to comment on something such as text and data mining and the complexities of competition policies would really, you would need some prior knowledge and expertise in those situations. And then lastly, we do want to point that Canada and Australia did partially demonstrate some responsiveness through their summary reports, while Colombia and the US, they made note that they received comments from the public. However, no evidence that these inputs actually influenced any outcomes. So I think it's clear that this isn't a one nation problem. It's more of a systemic challenge across these democracies. So getting really into your question, what is wrong with these, what is wrong with these consultative processes? So based off of the research across these four countries, we identified a few problems. First, the consultation objectives are often unclear. Do the policymakers just want expert opinion? I mean, they are the ones that are, in the weeds in these problems, or do they want broad public participation? That's not something that we're really getting from the governments. We're unsure of what they're looking for in these consultative processes. Just more comments or expert comments. Second, there's no shared common knowledge base for citizens to participate effectively. I think of it as if you run a small business, you're a busy parent, you're probably not going to have the time to become an expert on competition policy and give a copyright law and give effective comments. Yet, a lot of these consultation materials and the resources they provide are expecting some of this level of expertise. Third, the platform's participation are not widely known or accessed by the general public. Government websites, in the US, we have the Federal Registry. Notices usually meet policy professionals, people who do this for a living, or organized interest groups. We think it's really important. You need to meet the citizens where they are already spending their time. And, more policy professionals are spending time on those websites and those different portals. Fourth, governments often inform and consult, but they do not generally involve or collaborate with their citizens. So that goes back to the IAP2 framework. Most consultations stop at that second level when meaningful engagement really requires you to move up that spectrum. Fifth, there's no clear mechanism to demonstrate that this public feedback actually shapes decisions. What we heard reports are a great start, and not every country is doing that. So we want to, commend those countries that are, but they often read as summaries and, rather than explanations of how this input was actually incorporated. And then lastly, as a result of all these problems, the citizens don't feel heard. This, undermines trust, not just in the consultation process, but maybe government just more broadly. And just want to jump into some recommendations to close this out. So as we mentioned, one of the issues was working to build a common base of knowledge. So we would recommend that countries invest in AI literacy. This can, be creating and identifying readings for citizens so they can review together. Books like The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian or Co-Intelligence. We think this approach has several benefits. It creates a shared foundation of knowledge, and it can help restore some trust by demonstrating that the government values an informed public enough to even invest in citizen education. Second, we recommend you view public participation in AI governance not just as a policy problem, but a marketing and communication problem. This means like I said before, meeting citizens where they're at, going beyond traditional government channels, partnering with community organizations, ethnic media, and trusted local institutions. We want to look at France for this. France has an interesting model. In 2019, they created a Center for Citizen Participation that provides public officials with resources, templates, and digital tools for these participatory mechanisms. It maintains a portal for citizens where they can easily ask questions, as well as a physical space, which I think is very important to host meetings and activities with their citizens. It supports communities of practice on topics like collective intelligence and public participation. Third, we'd look to establish an always-on portal where citizens can ask questions and provide feedback. So that builds off of what I've just mentioned. Countries should have a designated staff that advocates and listens to their citizens. Canada has some experience with this already. They ran a platform called Let's Talk Federal Regulations, with allowed ongoing dialogue. Um, while these platforms have some limitations, the concept is pretty sound. Uh, this addresses problems that consultations feel, episodic, disconnected, or one-offs. And then lastly, for a recommendation, we recommend that every government agency and department designate an ombudsman to respond to public concerns about AI and practices. The ombudsman person should investigate citizens' complaints, resolve them, and identify reoccurring problems. This creates accountability and transparency, giving citizens a clear point of contact when they feel unheard, and it can create some mechanisms for demonstrating responsiveness and getting, farther up that IAP2 spectrum. So with that, I just want to thank you everyone for listening and taking the time.
Thank you very much, Michael. I don't know if there are any questions or any comments to Michael's presentation before we move to the other presentation. Okay, I don't see any hands or anyone from my end, but please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them at the discussion, at the chat. I will actually follow up on Michael's presentation and presenting what we are doing in the other part of the world, mainly in West Africa region, and the work we do at Niyel, as it also it fills in the same concept of the consultative processes for AI governance, but in the African context. Allow me to share my screen very quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's mainly the presentation, or what we're going to address in this one is how we're building participatory AI governance at Niyel in the Francophone West Africa region, from the different programs that we have on advocacy, on capacity building, but also on policy support to govern the different regions. I'm going to take you through very quickly like some of the initiatives that we have to promote ethical AI. But before that, for anyone who doesn't know Niyel, we are an private sector advocacy and public affairs agency, or of a firm. We're based in Dakar, in Senegal, and we mainly work to promote human rights, to protect also human rights, but ensure also that the public policies contribute to the development of everyone in the Francophone West Africa region, but also across the continent. We have different projects focusing on different sectors. One of them is the AI, which we call the Initiative for AI Development. And through this project, we work to advance ethical AI through the adoption of ethical standards in national strategies, national policies, but also to contribute to supporting or building the capacity of change creators or change makers in different sectors across the continent. Well, when it comes to AI, through the initiative EDIA, which is the Initiative of AI Development, we position human rights and human-centered approach in the different work that we do in terms of technology, in terms of policy, but also in terms of advocacy for ethical and inclusive AI. We have different initiatives that we can say boost the participative AI governance through including civil society organizations, researchers, innovators, academia, and also policymakers, parliamentarians as well, to make sure that we bridge the gap of knowledge, but also experience sharing between these different stakeholders. throughout India and also at Niyel, like we have been working like for the last maybe 5 to 6 years on creating the space to have regional dialogues, especially in the African context, but also regional like reuniting or gathering together like from the West Africa region, from the East Africa, from also the South and North. We've been conducting several regional dialogues and consultations in collaboration with the regional bodies such as the African Union, as is also the African Union Development Agency, where we're working on aligning regional frameworks to make sure with national policy development efforts, especially when it comes to national strategies on AI, but also when it comes to laws related to AI in the different countries. And those dialogues were initially forming our recommendations and call to actions to policymakers to invest more in local innovation, but also to invest in capacity building, either to policymakers, but also to researchers and to academia and civil society organizations, where we bring in everyone to the room, where they can share their perspective. And this is also part of what Michael mentioned, the consultation processes that is happening, but we make sure that these recommendations, they don't only stay on the desk, but we try to translate and work with the researchers to translate these recommendations into actionable like practices that policymakers could adopt, but also could consider in the work they do. We've been also conducting different activities when it comes to promoting ethical AI in Francophone Africa, not only limiting ourselves to policy level, but also to demystify AI within the grand public, within schools, within like even families. And this is through entering through different initiatives. One of them is Ami and Abu, which is one of the actually the first and only Francophone animated series on AI, and it's an animated series that poses an intergenerational dialogue with on AI, how it explains AI between a grandfather and his granddaughter, that is accessible to everyone, that is transparent, that is equal, and how what's the AI impact on our daily life, but also in our decision making. And here, like the intergenerational dialogue between the two personages really helps the public, either it's policymaker, either they are academia, students, even children, like from 8 years old, they can even benefit from this series to know what's AI and how they can use it to their benefit and not the inverse. And this animated series is actually available in our Niyel TV channel. So if anyone wants to have a look at it, that would be great. And it's also builds on different conversations that we're having, like online, but also in person, when we talk about AI, the impact of AI on economic, social, and development as well. And one of the initiatives that Niyel also was leaning on is the development of the first Francophone guidelines for ethical, inclusive, and responsible AI, where we had countries from West Africa like Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Conakry, and Mali. And all of these countries were reunited to develop on a framework and the guidelines, and these guidelines includes the principles of ethical AI, includes a benchmarking of the different countries, what's the state of AI development, of AI design in the different countries, but also in the region, and how they can monitor the AI deployment within their ecosystem, the national ecosystems. The guidelines was developed, this process was led by Niyel under the leadership of the Ministry of Digital Transition of Burkina Faso, but it also includes the endorsement of regional organizations like Audanepad and other research institutes from the different councils as well. The guidelines hopefully will be available so that everyone can use and can check the guidelines as a one like best practice or case study when it comes to ethical AI in the region. And through that, we've been also engaged. I think it was also mentioned in the session before, having like the summits. We hear about a lot about AI summits, like the Paris Summit, the Kigali Summit. But with the Kigali Summit, we've been involved in a research and reflection group, where different people from different organizations, researchers, innovators, civil society, private and public sector as well. We've been brought together to develop a call to action to expand on the global summit following the Kigali summit, and to provide input to African leaders where they can, where we can, how we can improve actually the summit's outcomes, especially in three pillars: the decent AI jobs for Africa, public engagement and participation, how to engage the public and civil society in contributing to AI governance, but also in resourcing participatory AI, and mainly to enhance and push for investments in research and initiatives that can identify opportunities for the public inputs during the life cycle of AI. And the call also was shared with African leaders, with the organizers of the Smart Africa, who are like leading on the organization of the summit, so that these contributions or the recommendations are taken in consideration in the like decision making processes at their level. And we're happy to be now at the India AI Summit, while we didn't have maybe the chance to be on the table in the last summits, but this year there was like more openness to bring in like more people from different backgrounds, from different organizations, where we really contribute to the discussions and conversations on different transversal priorities as well. As I mentioned, our work, it's not only focused on policymakers, or policy engagement, but we also include civil society organizations. A lot in 5 African countries. We've been working with 5 organizations, and we've been supporting them technically and financially to conduct consultations, national consultations at their countries, where they fit in the national context, where they fit in like to know from their communities the priorities, the needs of their communities, and how they can effectively contribute to the policy decision processes, but also to development processes of their national frameworks. Some of the results that we had from those consultations were a very like diverse participation. There were young people, there were women, there were people with disabilities, people from rural places who came to the focus groups that were organized by these organizations. We had approximately 500 activity participants in each activity. 10 cities were covered in the different countries, and up to 5,000 people who were reached indirectly, either online but also in person via local language radio broadcasts, where the organizations they use that to talk about AI, to explain to people what's AI impact, and how they can use it, and how they can actually be part of the consultative process through surveys, through thematic focus group. They were inviting like people to come. 2 consultations, national consultations, they were conducted so far in Burkina Faso and Mali, and Benin as well. I think Mali, sorry, it's ongoing, but also Burkina Faso and Benin were conducted, where we had 200 citizens contributed to the conversation, and they were collected to form like practical recommendations that they are delivered to the Ministry of Digital Transformations in Burkina Faso and Benin. And in each country, we had at least 200 community members were engaged in the conversations and equipped with AI knowledge. And some of these organizations, I can mention them, Save Our Planet. There is also another organization, Immersia in Mali, and other like the different ones who are very involved and engaged in AI, building capacity on AI, but also engaging community. At Niyel also, we're driving the fellowship program. I'll let my colleague Rugi here come in. She's the lead of the fellowship program, where she will take us through like the different phases of the actual program, and especially the outcomes from it. So Rugi, over to you. You're muted. I don't think I hear you. You are muted from my side. So, Rugi, can you hear me? Hello? I can't hear you. I don't know if it's from my side only. Can anyone hear Rugi?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah, sorry, I think you were not co-host. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
exactly. Officer was not letting me unmute. Okay. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Yossra. Thank you my name is Rouguiyatou Diaw, and I'm a program manager here at Niyel. Thank you for this opportunity to share on the Niyel Fellowship, which is a capacity building program that was developed by Niyel. So as my colleague Yossra mentioned earlier, our mission at Niyel is to inspire, enable, and create change by influencing policies and practices. Now, one of the ways that we enable change is through capacity building, and this is by providing professionals, and mostly public sector professionals, with the tools, the competences, and the network that they need to bring about positive change, whether it's within their organizations, their communities, and the sector. And this is what we're trying to do through the Niyel Fellowship, which is a 9-month capacity building that is designed for AI professionals which is designed to provide AI professionals with the knowledge and the tools needed to influence ethical and responsible decision-making on AI. So how do we do this? At the beginning of the fellowship, each fellow is required to define the change objective, and this change objective is within their mandate in their institution. And they're also required to develop an action plan that participate in 3 in-person sessions that last between 4 to 5 days. They also are required to participate in 3 virtual sessions. We also have monthly check-in sessions with them to make sure that they're progressing on their change objective, that they're implementing their action plan, and also see if they're facing any challenges that we might be able to support them with. And all these sessions are in line with a clearly defined curriculum that we've developed. The fellows are also trained on 3 different pillars. The first pillar is leadership. This is to ensure that they understand their own strengths as leaders, but also that they're also able to lead their teams through change. The second pillar on which they're trained is advocacy. It's for them to be able to improve policies and practices. And the third pillar on which they're trained is for them to be able to position their contributions to the sector and share on the different issues that they're working on. Another essential component of this fellowship is the mentorship element. At the beginning of the fellowship is each fellow
it's breaking from your side, Rugi.
is assigned a mentor that. Oh, sorry about that. Let me just turn off my camera and see if it's better. Maybe it'll be better then. So yes, so I was saying, I don't know, is this much better now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So sorry about that. So as I was saying, the mentorship element is very important. Each fellow is assigned a mentor at the beginning of the program, with whom they work throughout the 9 months of the fellowship, and even sometimes beyond. We have alumni members today who are still in contact with their former mentors and who support them within their careers and the different challenges that they face, basically, with the work that they're doing. At the end of the fellowship, so this is a little bit of the curriculum, but at the end of the fellowship, all the fellows also get to share in front of a large audience on their journey, but also on what they've achieved throughout the fellowship at an event that we organized that is called the Slingshot, a Change Creators Summit. And they get to share in front of their peers, of experts, within their sectors, funders, and a really big, large audience on their journey as a fellow, but also on what they've been able to achieve and the changes that they've been able to get. At the end of the fellowship, beyond the skills that they've also acquired when it comes to leadership, advocacy, voice, the peer learning that they've had, what we found is that fellows are really empowered to own their power to act. They're really more confident, they have a better understanding of their own power to drive change and influence policies and practices. They're also better equipped to inspire others to bring about change within the communities and the sectors that they work in. So in all this year, we have 5 fellows from the AI. They're from ministries in West Africa and also from parliaments. So that's a brief description of the Niyel Fellowship. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rugi. With that, this is a little bit of what Niyel is doing for ethical AI in West Africa. I don't know if there are any questions or any contributions. Okay, I don't see any hands, but if someone wants to come in, please feel free to raise your hand or to add to the chat. Thank you very much, Rugi, for joining me in this. So we'll go to the next presentation as we flow on the participatory AI in different contexts. We'll go mainly focus now on the public participatory AI in the public sector context, where Monira Yassien, I don't know, I don't see Monira in my screen, but Monira, are you here?
She's not here. She's not here.
Okay, great.
She's not here. Sorry to interrupt, Pierre, from another account. She's not here, but I just received an email informing me that someone is speaking, like she's being replaced by Rouguiyatou.
No, Rouguiyatou is my colleague from Niyel.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Jemima, I misinterpreted your email then. I thought she was being replaced by someone. Okay, well, then I shot her an email if she's not connecting. Then I guess we have an extended Q&A ahead of us.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's too bad for the other sessions. I know they didn't have time for Q&A. But I will go to Jae-Jun Lee. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And I'm very excited to hear from you about the privacy enhancing technologies and how they are increasingly used in like institutions, especially in public institutions, to manage risk across the AI life cycle from data collection, but also to forming trainings and intergenerational collaboration. So over to you, Jae-Jun Lee. Correct me if I'm wrong. So,
Jay's great as well. And yeah, I think everyone should see my sort of full screen here with the presentation slides, and I see you nodding there, so that's fantastic. So great, my name is Jae-Jun Lee, which is how I anglicize it. I say definitely in Korean, so who knows how I actually pronounce it right. And I am a PhD student at Cornell Tech, where I focus on privacy enhancing technologies, and this presentation is a reflection of work that I'm doing with one of my advisors, Daniel Sussa, in the Information Science Department. And I'm also doing some work thinking about how to connect this work with sort of participation, thinking about participatory pets. That's work with Dana Boyd. So we kind of wanted to acknowledge that sort of work. And so this is a reflection of that sort of stitching together of 2 different pieces of my work, or our work, as I should say. So great. The argument which I make around privacy enhancing technologies is that the way that privacy enhancing technologies is applied in AI and other domains sometimes is problematic, and the way that we can kind of counter these problematic implementations of privacy enhancing technologies is through many means, but one of them could be through participation. So that's sort of the argument I'm going to try to stitch together. But since I don't think everyone may be familiar with the term, at least, privacy enhancing technologies, I'm going to give a short sort of definition here. Privacy enhancing technologies sort of comprise a set of different technical methods for managing data privacy risks while supporting the collection and analysis of data. And there are different ways in which privacy-enhancing technologies can do this. They can alter the data. They can sort of add random noise into the data to protect individuals while preserving the statistical qualities of the data that are being collected. You can encrypt the data and allow people to be able to analyze encrypted data without unencrypting it, so securing people's privacy in that way. Or you can sort of do, this is actually how a lot of things work with AI, is you run computations on people's devices, and then you send the model that's trained on people's data in the devices, and you share the model with the curator without having to share their sort of underlying data. So you only return the aggregate result. So there are different ways in this can happen. So I'm going to offer some examples. One of them is Apple Intelligence. I've got a really old iPhone. I don't have Apple Intelligence, but if you've got one of the newer iPhones, you're actually using pets in AI. So when you're creating sort of image playgrounds and using some of the writing tools in the iPhone, creating Gemojis, I have no idea what that is. Some of the things, if they're too complicated, you can't do them on your phone. And so what Apple does is that it takes your information on your phone, encrypts it, sends it to the cloud, runs those sort of computes in the cloud, and then gives you back sort of the results to your queries that you need. And so what they say is, and I think it's really fascinating the way that they put this, is they hermetically seal, your data is hermetically sealed inside of a privacy bubble. So even if it leaves, it never sort of, it's always sealed within this bubble. And another way that privacy enhancing technologies are used in AI, for example, is hospitals have a bunch of information about diagnostic information about their patients. If you want to train an AI model, we all know that you need tons and tons and tons of data. And so individual hospitals don't have enough data to train a really accurate AI model to detect things like cancer, for example. And so they try to pull all this information from patients across multiple different hospitals. And you can train an AI model on it without necessarily sharing the patient data. And so in some case, I think what we see with pets is that we see this language of privacy enhancing, that these things are privacy preserving technologies, and they sort of imply that we think about these really impressive technological engineering feats, and that there's some sort of protection that flows from just merely adopting these sort of technologies. So for example, if we use something called differential privacy, which is a type of pet that I focus on, we think that that's it. The privacy has been enhanced, and we don't really need to think more about that. But this is the kind of story that I would like to complicate. We're told that our data is being protected, but in practice, I think one of the things that we see, especially in the commercial context, I'll compare this with sort of a public context in a second, or actually towards the end of the talk, is that what is actually being protected is the organization collecting it and their underlying business model. And so these privacy enhancing technologies are these really sophisticated sort of engineering sleight of hands that take away our attention from, I think, really some of the social, if not political things that are happening underneath it. So that's kind of, I think, in the talk, what I'm going to try to say here is that privacy enhancing technologies compel choices. These choices serve someone. And then the last thing I'm going to try to get to in the last third of the talk is under what conditions can the rest of us as a public, as a community, as affected communities can have a say in this. So in what we're calling these are sites of indeterminacy. They're just points at which I think sort of social choices need to be made. So these questions come up. You can't simply just apply these sort of pets in a way that you apply a filter to a photograph. You have to, in deploying these, there are a couple of open social questions that curators and the public and at large have to sort of deal with. And how these questions are resolved shapes who is protected, how much they're protected, and at cost, and what cost to whom. So some of these sites that we're talking about are, how is privacy being defined here, for example? How is data utility being defined here? The second one is, what are the exact threat models that this privacy enhancing technology is actually protecting us from? The third question is, what are the sort of necessary technical parameters that have to be configured? And the fourth one, this broad question about how pets align with the institutional practices and what gets changed and what doesn't. I'll walk through this in a bit more detail in a bit. So I'm going to use two examples. The first one focusing on the sort of necessary technical parameters and how they're configured. So if we look at this really early example, almost a decade ago, Apple uses differential privacy. They use pets to collect user data. So for example, if you're Apple's trying to figure out who uses emojis and what are the most popular emojis, right? So if you're using an app, they collect data from users. And they were putting something called privacy enhancing technologies to protect people's data. The problem is that if you set the parameter of this differential privacy far towards accuracy, you're losing a lot of privacy. On the other hand, if you're turning this dial, as you can imagine it, towards confidentiality, you're losing a lot of accuracy. And so what Apple did is that in this sort of large-scale adoption of differential privacy, they changed this noise value, or what we call epsilon, far towards accuracy. And so Frank McSherry, who's one of the co-inventors of differential privacy, put it memorably. He said that turns out Apple was actually putting handcuffs on the data, but these handcuffs ended up being made of tissue paper. So they weren't really substantial. And the second sort of thing, and I'll touch on this towards the end, is that Apple also kept the code and these epsilon values secret, and researchers had to try to reconstruct what these sort of parameters were. Great, awesome. So the point here is that we can see here are choices being made about the technical parameters, and that Apple, in this case, about 10 years ago, made these sort of choices that way that seemed like they were preserving your privacy, but in actual fact, they were actually preferencing their own sort of organizational interests. There are other sites here that we can think about in terms of how privacy is being defined again, or what the threat model is, and how these sort of pets align with institutional practices. I'm going to try to tackle all three of these because of time. In one example, and this is, I don't know if people care about cookies, for example. Cookies are things that track people's activities so they can, when you're on the web. And so Google in 2019 said that they announced something called the Privacy Sandbox Initiative, and they said that they would be removing third-party tracking from Chrome. And they obviously said this is a privacy initiative. And what I thought was really interesting is that the UK Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, investigated and found something else at play. And they found that in implementing these privacy-enhancing technologies, they were actually self-preferencing their own business model. So they were actually cutting out all the other third-party cookies and making it so that they were the only ones with the insight into users' behaviors. And so everything had to go through them. And so this said this was actually a monopoly issue. And so Google had to abandon the initiative entirely. And so at the end of the day, my argument is that this was really not about privacy. The privacy framing was just instrumental. What it was actually serving was Google's competitive position and using privacy-enhancing technologies as the guise to do it. And when that was no longer possible, they just dropped it. And so this kind of gets to what are the definitions of privacy or the threat models at play here. And sort of Helen Nissenbaum and Lee McGuigan wrote a letter to the competition and market authorities saying that, is this a rigorous definition of privacy? They answered no. And they said that, are Google's plans and the notions of privacy supporting them adequate for confronting how digital surveillance actually operates today? And they believe that it was not. But if we think about things like privacy as freedom from surveillance, this wasn't really quite meeting that sort of standard. And so I'm going to quickly go through this and just sort of just to say that there are problematic ways in which tech companies, for example, use privacy-enhancing technologies in ways that we think are problematic. And we sort of provide a topology of what these sort of problematic ways are doing it. So all of this is to say, under what conditions can the rest of us have a say about how privacy-enhancing technologies are used in AI? And if we really care about privacy-preserving AI, what can we as a public do about it? And so this kind of gets to the participatory piece of it. So this is a sort of a long layout. So we know that Sherry Arnstein, back I think it was 1969, said that what we mean by participation is my answer to the critical question of what question is simply that citizen participation is a categorical term for citizen power. It's about the redistribution of power. So the question that I think we should all be contending with in this particular scenario is not whether affected communities should participate in configuring, say, privacy tools. The answer is obviously yes, but the question is, what does participation need to do, and under what sort of conditions can participation actually happen? Not merely as consultation, that is sort of providing input, but actually as a countervailing power against the power of tech companies. So when can communities possess the structural capacity to alter configurations that would otherwise serve the deployer of these sort of technologies? So, for example, I think one of the answers that we usually go to, and this is sort of more towards a consultation phrase, is that we need transparency into these sort of tools and how they're applied. So, like I said earlier, Apple actually kept these sort of code and epsilon values secret. And so we can't contend things if there's no transparency into these sort of parameters. And there's some work going on right now, which I think is incredibly interesting, is creating publicly available communal knowledge about differential privacy implementations that can be used by different stakeholders to drive an identification and adoption of judicious differential privacy implementation. So you're creating all this information and documenting all the information about the technical parameters. And so maybe could this be a point in which stakeholders engage with these technical parameters? They can help set epsilon. Sort of, there's been a sort of a new community of practice around this work. But the argument that I'm going to try and make, and as we turn to one case scenario that I care deeply about, and that's the 2020 census, my argument is going to be that shared knowledge infrastructure is important, transparency is vital, but those alone don't equal leverage. And we actually need leverage against these sort of institutions in able to have the power to change and create meaningful participation. And so, yeah. In the 2020 census, if you're in the United States, you participate in the 2020 census, and whether you know it or not, differential privacy, one of these privacy-enhancing technologies, was used. Differential privacy is the same technology that Apple was using, that Google was using, but it had a radically different outcome. And so one of the questions we want to ask is, why was there a radically different outcome? And what we actually saw is that different configurations of how differential privacy was implemented was contested publicly for years. And these sort of epsilon values became sort of something that people could point to, argue about, and demand justification from the Census Bureau. And these had sort of massive consequences, sort of for congressional apportionment, redistricting, the distribution of trillions of dollars in annual federal funding. And there were particular communities, such as tribal nations, small communities, minority populations, or communities of color that were most affected by these sort of noises and could try fight it. And the Bureau had to respond. And the question was why? And I think part of the argument is not because there was a good participatory process in place. There wasn't actually, but there was something larger, more structural at play here. And so this is the last point I just want to sort of end off on. This is sort of an area that I want to think more about. I apologize. I know it's a lot of words. But the point I want to try and make here is that what was really unique about the census context is, first of all, there was a really robust social infrastructure around it. There were stakeholder communities that were built around the activity of doing the census since the 1950s and the 70s and the 90s, and the different actors that were really entrenched in the census. And so this points to decades of accumulated relationship building that was repurposed for differential privacy. So when the Census Bureau tried to figure out how to do pets in a participatory way, they had this really dense network of actors and stakeholders already there, and that they could repurpose those existing networks to do differential privacy in a participatory way. The second thing is the timing of it. The Census Bureau did this thing over years. They first did a Federal Register notice in 2018. We can still say this wasn't enough time, but there was multiple levels of iteration and engagement with stakeholders, where stakeholders could learn how to speak about differential privacy and translate their concerns about, sort of, for example, what would happen to the data on young kids, and translate that in terms of technical privacy. And people doing technical privacy could speak to data users and understand their concerns. And this sort of mutual transformation, or what Steve Epstein would call sort of this metamorphosis, happened, and creating interactional expertise between stakeholders and technical experts. And the second one, and the last kind of point I want to point here, is that there was actual genuine institutional leverage. The Census Bureau needed user input in order to fulfill its obligations, and the users had statutory, legally mandated use cases that they could say, hey, Census Bureau, you're not meeting our needs. And so there was a legal infrastructure that provided leverage to stakeholders, that provided them real power to be able to engage in these sort of processes. Great. I will stop here. I think I'm probably over time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would love to hear what folks' thoughts are, especially as I'm coming to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jai Jondi. Thank you very much for this. I think it's an insightful presentation. It's very enriching. I don't know if Munira joined us, but yeah, I don't think so. Otherwise, I would have received that. But however, I have a question for you, maybe Jun Lee, and also if anyone else have a question, please feel free to drop that in the chat, or also to come in to ask directly. My question is that I mean you mentioned that that the privacy enhancing technologies, they really like they introduce very hard privacy risk protection, like very hard like trade-offs, but it's not also about technicality or technical concepts around it. It's also a matter of justice. And I think you also addressed this in your paper when you talked about how they are affecting legitimacy of public trust, how they are affecting justice as well. So I would be more, I would be keen to interested actually how should institutions like make defensible decisions while privacy technologies like pets and everything, they require a lot of normative trade-offs, which perhaps like institutions they don't have that accessibility. Yes. So yeah, over to you, Jun.
That's a great question and a difficult one, obviously, as well. I think the part that I think is interesting about pets is that in implementing these pets, and this is an interesting thing, is in implementing these pets, even if they're not doing the job of providing privacy, it has this sort of secondary effect where organizations need to become very clear about what they're doing. So it structures an internal process within the organization where they need to be able to articulate, document, and make transparent what exactly these sort of trade-offs are and what they're doing and how they're implementing it. And so it actually creates a regime of privacy organization, or of how to manage privacy internally within the organization, if that makes sense. And so pets have that sort of effect. So I'm not answering the question of how exactly are we supposed to address these sort of trade-offs and values. But the point is that I think we need to become clear about how these sort of values are being weighed, what the rationale is, and being able to, I think, contest that in sort of a public sphere. But I think, again, my point is that I think transparency alone is not sort of sufficient. We can't assume that because they're implementing a pet, we can't ask, how should we implement this correctly? We need to first step back and say, is this whole endeavor of you collecting our data legitimate in the first place? And so I think helping think about pets sort of, we have to contend with these two questions: is, are we legitimizing something that is otherwise problematic? And we're trying to use privacy enhancing technologies to sanitize things or put sort of a nice veneer on something that is actually otherwise really problematic. Yeah, sorry, I don't think that answered your question, but I think these are sort of questions and difficult issues I'm trying to contend with as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very like technical and complex topic. I think it requires a lot of discussion. So I don't know if there are any more questions or any comments or any contributions that anyone from the room wants to come in. So I can see the screen, but yeah, if there is anyone, please feel free to come in. Okay. Yeah, I think we were very efficient in the session. It was very clear. Thanks everyone. Thank you very much, Michael, Lee, also for these interventions, also for my colleague Rouguiyatou. I think it gave us a great oversight of the different consultative processes across the globe, but also how to make sure that we have meaningful engagement and effective engagement by citizens, but also in the decision-making processes, how to make sure that the decision-making processes are not exclusive, but to include but inclusive, and also it's very important to what Junji mentioned, the participatory pets implementation, and what does actually it requires to make sure that we have legitimacy in public trust as well in these systems. It's very unfortunate that we didn't have Munira, because her presentation was a bit more of falls under how to make sure AI-powered public systems are visible, traceable, and accountable. And here takes us to the transparency and accountability principles of ethical AI, which I think are one of the, or I mean, two of the main principles of ethical AI that are included in different frameworks at global but also regional level. So I don't know if no more contributions. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this session today.